Chair Rivera, we're live.
Thank you, Ben. We'll just go through, Regina. If we need to switch the presentations, we can do that.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Let's call the Public Works meeting for September 11th, 2023 to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Counselor Amanda Chavez.
Here.
Counselor Lee Garcia.
He's excused.
Okay, Counselor Michael Garcia
Present.
and Chair Rivera.
I'm here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Wheeler. Approval of the agenda. Any changes?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
All right. Wishes of the committee.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion for approval and a second of the agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Next, approval of the consent agenda. Any changes?
No
Director?
changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Nothing was pulled from members?
I was not notified of anything being pulled.
All right. Anything from committee members before we move on?
Move
Right,
to
what-
approve. Second.
A motion for approval of the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Next, we're on to public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would wish to address the committee? See no one here. That part of the agenda is closed. We're on to presentation informational items. Are we ready for 2 Mile Pond or do we want to skip to the aircraft system?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have received the email and it's just scanning to make sure it doesn't have any, so I should be ready in a minute. Do you want to start, Jesse?
All right, so we're on to the update on 2 Mile Pond with Director Roach from the Water Division. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will start because I wanted to start with just reading a summary of sort of where we are now with 2 Mile Pond. And then I'll proceed with the slides. So in 1893, 2 Mile Dam was constructed 2 miles up the Santa Fe River from the plaza. In 1992, after discovery of a crack in the earthen dam and an underlying geological fault, the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer ordered the water company, which was purchased by the city in 1995, to cease storing water behind 2 Mile Dam. In 1994, the OSE, the Office of the State Engineer, followed up with a breach order, which the water company complied with by removing most of the dam, leaving the remnant 2 Mile Pond. In 2012, the Nature Conservancy constructed a diversion from the Santa Fe River to the riparian area feeding the pond. And then pursuant to a settlement between the Nature Conservancy and the OSE, TNC removed the diversion in July of 2023. In response to this removal and associated concern about stagnation of the pond, city staff cleaned the pond's outlet structure to bring the pond size back to its 1994 level. And the city is currently working with the OSE to verify the legal status of the pond and the city's options for directing surface flows through 2 Mile Pond. So that's sort of the current status, the statement, and looks like the presentation is ready. And so I will sort of step through some more of the background information. So on that title slide, there's a few kind of fun photos. The upper left is a photo. It's hard to tell, but there's actually a herd of goats on the left side of that photo that is compacting the puddled clay, which is how dams were built at that time. And that I've been told that that's a photo of 2 Mile Dam under construction. The upper right shows machinery being used to actually decommission the dam, so remove the dam itself. The lower left shows the old outlet works of the dam connected to a screen. And that was the infrastructure put in place to allow for a pond, but drainage through it. And then the lower right is today what that screen looks like. So if you could move forward, the summary I read, so let's move forward one more to the timeline. And this is sort of a different way of talking about a little bit of what I already discussed with a little bit more historical information. So in 1881, the first municipal dam was constructed. It was called Old Stone Dam, and it was 28 feet high. It stored about 25 acre-feet of water. 12 years later, the 2 Mile Dam was constructed. And for reference, 2 Mile Dam is just above Cerro Gordo, where Cerro Gordo crosses the Santa Fe River before it ends when it hits Canyon Road. That one was much higher. It was 85 feet high and stored almost 450 acre-feet of water. One interesting piece is that when they constructed 2 Mile Dam in 1893, they built a 5-foot diameter concrete tunnel to bypass the Santa Fe River during construction. So they could take water from the old reservoir, the Old Stone Dam reservoir, and bypass it around the 2 Mile Dam so that they could keep the dam site dry and continue to utilize the water. Then in the early 1900s, Old Stone Dam reservoir filled with sediment from a large storm. At that time, the sediment issues were a driving concern in reservoir management. And at some point after that, the concrete bypass tunnel became an open bypass channel, which continued to protect the reservoir from inflows of sediment. And you'll see on the next map that it today is still an open bypass channel that takes the flows of Santa Fe River around what was the 2 Mile Dam reservoir. So then fast forward almost 100 years since construction of the dam. And in 1992, a crack was found in the dam. And the reservoir, the Office of the State Engineer ordered that the reservoir be drained, which it was. And then in 1994, that was followed up by actually breaching the dam, which basically means removing the dam entirely. And storage rights were moved upstream to an enlarged McClure Reservoir. And the 2 Mile Pond, capable of retaining less than 10 acre-feet, was left on the upstream side of the breached dam. In 2012, and so importantly, the Santa Fe River sort of flows around this whole complex. In 2012, a diversion structure was built across the bypass channel to divert water from the Santa Fe River to the 2 Mile Pond area and riparian complex. In 2018, the Office of the State Engineer ordered that the Nature Conservancy cease and desist diverting that water. And in 2021, they followed up. And this year, the diversion structure was removed. And then we've found and cleaned the outlet structure, which reduced the pond level by about 2.5 feet. So going to the next slide, we see a map of the sort of area in question. On the far right is Nichols Dam, and then the river flows down through a little check dam structure that has had historical use. And then it flows around the whole 2 Mile Pond complex. But for about 10 years, there was a gate called that could divert water into what was called a restoration channel to send water back through 2 Mile Pond complex. That's what was removed this summer. And I think that's probably enough context for that particular slide. The next slide shows photos of the standpipe, which is what I'm calling that structure that is essentially a screen over the outlet work. So it allows water to flow down through the old tunnel under the dam and out the bottom, but without allowing large debris to get in there. So you can see on the left that it had become overgrown to the point where vegetation had clogged it all the way basically to the top of the rim of the screen. And so when we cleaned that, that allowed the pond level to drop back down to the intended level of the design when the dam was breached. And so that's the current status of the pond. One other thing I think to mention here is in the final slide, just showing, or the almost final slide, the number of this is a complicated issue with a lot of different stakeholders who are interested in the pond and the water that may or may not flow through the pond. And there has been engagement with those stakeholders, and there will continue to be engagement with those stakeholders moving forward as we look for some sort of a solution to this complicated water resources management issue. So I don't think I'll read them all, but I did want to sort of show the riparian landowners, the acequias, the River Commission, and then several governmental entities and the Canyon Neighborhood Association have all been involved in outreach that we've done through this summer, and actually starting last year with the Nature Conservancy as this issue was becoming, we started to recognize it. So with that, I will put up the summary slide one more time, the sort of statement of where we are, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Roach, for the presentation. Let's get our questions started with Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to be clear on when you clean the standpipe, the water level, so the water that is in the pond comes from the fact that the storage, that the standpipe had not been cleaned, so the water was essentially backing up and the pond was becoming larger. And without that diversion, the other source of water for that pond is groundwater. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Romero Worth, that is a good point, and thank you for asking that question. There's sort of two different components to this system that are important to keep in mind here. One of them is storage, how much water is stored in the pond, and then the other is how much water is flowing through that. So you could have a pond with no water flowing through it or very little water flowing through it, and it would still have the same storage. But as you start to move water through it, the storage won't change, but the amount of time that the water's spending in that pond will change. So the storage of this pond is controlled by that standpipe, which we saw the pictures of. And as the vegetation was allowed to grow up around it, the level of water in the pond increased. Once that was cleaned, the level of the water decreased. And so that's what's controlling the storage. But in terms of what's controlling the amount of water that flows through the pond, once that diversion was removed, there isn't a direct surface water connection. So the only water that moves through the pond is groundwater that's seeping either from the bypass channel, so from the Santa Fe River, seeping down into that area, or there's also groundwater moving to that low point along the river from both sides. And so you can see, if you walk out to the standpipe today, you'll see water flowing through it, even though no surface water is being directly diverted into that pond complex. And that's groundwater moving into that low point and then flowing through the standpipe. So that's sort of the two pieces there. And it was in a response to worry about the lack of flow through the pond that we went and found that standpipe and cleaned it. And therefore there's less storage, and therefore a little bit, the water that is moving through it is there a little bit less time.
Yeah, and I guess storage isn't really the right word, right? Because we moved our quote unquote water rights that allowed us to store water, to accumulate it in a dam kind of way up to McClure. And so what's there is sort of a remnant pond. And that pond, because the standpipe had not been cleaned, the water kind of backed up in essence and made it seem perhaps bigger. And now that the standpipe's been cleared, the water is running through and it's gone down to the 94 levels. And the 94 levels were when we acted on the Office of the State Engineer's breach order that said we couldn't have a dam there anymore. We had to take the dam out. And so what's accumulating there in the pond is kind of a natural phenomenon because we don't have the infrastructure there anymore for it to be a dam because it was unsafe.
So I would just draw a distinction to the size. I think what happened, my understanding of what happened in 1994 was the dam was removed, but the relic storage, we could call it, we have no ability to manage that storage, but the relic amount of water that was still behind this remnant structure was small enough that the state engineer didn't care. It was a very small volume. At this point, whether they care or not is a matter that's still sort of up for debate. But
well, it's part of what we're seeking guidance about, correct?
that's correct.
Yeah.
So there is a small amount of relic storage, but we don't have any rights to store water there because we move those rights all up to McClure to store any amount of water above that relic portion that's still behind the remnant structure.
Right. And it's not a dam anymore because it was because of the fault underneath it. We had to breach the dam and have this relic storage or pond naturally occurring because it wasn't safe to store any large amounts of water because of the fault under it.
That's correct. It was a dam safety issue. So we removed the dam so that no water above the small relic portion would stay behind that remnant structure.
And I guess, back then they were concerned that if that fault might have caused the dam to breach on its own and all that water would have gone flooding down into the neighborhood it was a public safety issue.
That's correct, which is why when they found the crack, they immediately ordered it be drained. And then it took them a couple of years to figure out what was the long-term solution. And the long-term solution was that an earthen dam of that size, an earthen dam couldn't be on that fault.
Right.
And so the choice was to build a different, much more expensive dam there, or instead we raised McClure and moved the water rights upstream and did not leave any storage rights in that location.
Yeah, and enlarged McClure to hold the water that provides the city with water. We just moved it to infrastructure that could better hold that water and do so safely.
That's correct.
And seems like I had another question. So, and the cleaning of this standpipe, there was concern from the neighborhood that the water was stagnating and that was causing some issues both with smell and with mosquitoes. And so that's part of the reason why you all went up there to take a look. And what you found was this clogged standpipe that was, in essence, keeping the groundwater from flowing through the infrastructure that is there. And so the water wasn't moving. So it was backing up in essence and creating perhaps a larger pond than might have been intended in 1994, but also was causing these other problems around, the smell because the water's not circulating. And when water doesn't circulate, you get mosquitoes.
So I think that's correct, that by reducing the volume of the pond, the amount of flow through it allows the pond to be less stagnant. It also results in less evaporation. So whatever amount of groundwater is seeping into this low point, which is the pond, it can go one of two places. It can be evaporated either directly from the pond or from plants, riparian vegetation, or it can actually flow out the bottom of the pond. And so if you can reduce that evaporation, you're going to get a little bit more flow through. And also, as you reduce that level, the groundwater gradient will be slightly increased. So there's also the potential that you get a little bit more flow as you're speaking to a little bit more groundwater flow through a slightly lower pond. And then finally, the volume is less. So the amount of time that each bit of water spends in there is going to be less because of less volume. So for all those reasons, reducing it back to the target 1994 level should have helped, or probably did help, with stagnation concerns.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is, because of that stagnation of the water, can you speak to the vegetation that's there and the plant life that's there? I think went out there, and it's pretty rooted or established, or it's not.
I'm not an expert on ecology or ponds or meadows, but you could see from those photos that there's sort of lily pad type vegetation all over the pond before the standpipe was cleaned, and currently to today. And I did get in a little boat and float around out there to kind of get a sense of how deep it was. And all of those plants, each of those leaves is connected by a stem to the bottom. So in my opinion, it's, this pond is slowly turning into a meadow. So there is a lot of vegetation. And I think the reduction of the pond, will result in some temporary dieback of that vegetation. But as this new level is established, I think we'll start to see something that resembles fairly closely what it looked like early this summer, just slightly smaller.
And we might maybe down the road be able to get some ecologists out there and look at the ecology of the pond and see what we can do with the water level, the 94 water level, what we can do to, I don't know, beautify it in a way, make it healthy, make it, I don't know, more, can't think of the word I want, but just something more than like mud and gunk.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on those sort of processes, but it's certainly something that we're interested in knowing more about what the options are. I think the options from a sort of restoration perspective probably run the gamut from things that you're alluding to of maybe some sort of a dredging of what's there to a full river restoration at some point. But then on the other end, there's also the question of how much, if and can we move flow through it? And so those are the sort of active questions that we're working through.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to your last slide, the stakeholder engagement slide. And you had, prior to being out there, I think this was prior to going out there and finding the standpipe in the condition it was, you had been talking with folks, some of these different stakeholders about the pond and what could be achieved and how to handle this situation. And I think it's fair to say, and maybe you can touch on this, that there are differing opinions, there are differing rights, and there are differing positions about what we should be doing with regard to the pond and how it affects the Santa Fe River and our Living River allotment, which is really what had been flowing through 2 Mile Pond. And so not everybody is of the same mind about what to do. And that's part of the complexity of this, is trying to figure out how we balance the different interests among many stakeholders. And I'll pick one, and the acequias certainly were part of this in the sense that they do have rights. water rights, and they were concerned that they weren't getting their allotments, which is part of, I think, what led to TNC having to get rid of the diversion, besides the fact that TNC didn't have water rights to be diverting. So that was an issue. And then you have in some of these other stakeholders, different ideas about what we do with the living river that we have to use for that pond and for the river itself, and where the river flows. How far south can we get the river? And I think there's still some questions out there about, if you run the water through the pond, does that have an impact on how far you can get the water downstream? So again, that's I'm perhaps leading the witness into some of the complexities that I think you're dealing with, but maybe you can comment on, there's a couple of things in there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks. There is a lot of complexity around and understanding as to how efficient we could get with moving water through the pond now at the 1994 levels compared to how efficiently water might have been moving through this more overgrown higher pond level. And you are correct. The Sakias felt that diversion was interfering with our ability to get water around the pond to them, and therefore their ability to get the water to which they have a right. And then you mentioned the living river flows, which the River Commission feels those flows in general or probably should try and get as far down the river as possible. And so it's that balancing act. And those are the ideas that we were exploring, is if you have less storage, could you put more water through there? And that's still information that we need to try and figure out a way to gather as we work through what's the long-term solution to this issue.
Right. And I think that's the tricky part, is that, again, I spent time, particularly during the pandemic, walking around that pond. It's a valuable, it's valuable to the neighborhood and the people who do go up there. And I think the question is, one of many questions, and again, leading back to the complexity, is, what can we do there? And, how do we use the water we have? And, what kind of restoration could we do to make it more beautiful, more appealing? And then again, how do we serve these other needs? Make sure that the acequias get the water they're entitled to, make sure that we are using the living river water, which is something very important to this community in the manner that this community would like to see their living river water used. And then I think, there may be, this year, I think you also had some storage management ability, because we had a lot of water and you needed to manage the reservoir. And so there may be some things that we could do there that could help meet the different needs of these stakeholders. And I don't know, do you want to comment on kind of what you faced this year, and if we have another year like that, how that might help balance these interests and help meet a variety of interests and positions?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point and a good question. I think the water potentially that could be directed through 2 Mile Pond area is going to be, in the short term at least, would be living river water, some portion of that, some base flow perhaps, and water that is surplus water because we're managing reservoir levels. And so that's what you're getting at. And I think one of the sort of exciting things that we did discover in all this, the two big pieces of information that we came away from this with is finding and cleaning the outlet works. That was something that had sort of fallen out of our institutional knowledge, and now it's back. And then also in that map that I showed, there was a check structure shown, and it turns out that we actually do have the ability to move water through 2 Mile Pond. So initially 6 months ago, I was talking about building a structure that would allow us to send water through the pond, but, have maintained some other management needs that we have. And now it appears that that's already there. So really for us, it's now a matter of finding out the legal framework within which we can work. And that's an active ongoing conversation with the Office of the State Engineer with, phone calls and emails being exchanged just today.
Great. And I guess that's where I'd leave it too, is that, so we have, different parties wanting different things and making sure, and some with legal rights that we have to meet, the acequias. But then we're operating within what the state engineer says we can or can't do, because of course we're dealing with water, and we can't do just whatever we want. There's a framework that says what we can and can't do. And that also is part of the complexity, is consulting with the state engineer to find out what our legal options are, and determining and getting, and I think, they have a fair amount of bureaucracy that they have to run ideas through, and they have to, get their lawyers all on the same page in terms of what's feasible and what's not. And so that's part of what's leading to more complexity, but also taking time to figure out what we can do. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think that's what's been taking all of you, besides learning about the infrastructure up there, learning about the riparianness of it, learning about our standpipe and the drainage capacity. And then, there's a whole legal piece that I think staff, and I think you're part of those conversations, working on what are our options there.
Right. And I guess to that, I would add that, of course, the majority of the water that falls in the watershed is used in the city by municipal users. And there is a cost. And we have decided as a community that we are willing to accept the cost to the user of dedicating some amount of water to the river. But it's important to recognize that, the Santa Fe River water is the number one source for us. We want to use surface water preferentially over groundwater. And when you have surface water sitting at 7,500 feet versus surface water down at 5,000 feet, and clean surface water sitting at 7,500 feet compared to, less, more impaired water at a lower elevation. It's a no-brainer to us that we really want to optimize the use of that for municipal use as well. And so finding that balance between municipal use and water flows to the river and water flows to the pond and to the acequias, that's all part of this sort of complicated legal and management exercise that we're going through.
Right. And just I thought that was where I was going to end. Sorry, Mr. Chair, but one more question. So can you for people who may watch this later or who are watching now and may not be familiar, the Living River water portion is how much? There's a spectrum, and maybe you can speak to what this community has said, has agreed to be the Living River, and what the spectrum is and how that's used.
That's right. Okay. So the Living River varies from 300 acre feet in the most dry years up to 1,000 acre feet in average to above average years. And I would say that the Santa Fe River flows at maybe 4,000 or 5,000 acre feet a year in average to above average years. So we're talking roughly a fifth to a quarter of the water that has been, that's available, that could be available for our use, that has been set aside for the benefit of the Living River.
And that's really the portion we're talking about, and how to balance that, and whether, how we, what capacity do we have to run it through 2 Mile Pond? What will the state engineer allow us to have in terms of pooling or storage? What does that mean for how far it goes down? Maybe it doesn't have any impact, and we can run it through 2 Mile Pond and it'll get as far as it would if we didn't put it through 2 Mile Pond. And I think that is something you're exploring as well. And probably are going to need more time to better understand, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. And we do have some instrumentation and we're looking at adding more so that we can really understand that question is if we send a gallon of water around 2 Mile Pond, how much of it gets to the point where the bypass channel and the flows through 2 Mile Pond meet? And if we send a gallon through 2 Mile Pond, how much gets there? What's the difference? How does that change depending on time of the year, depending on how much water's in the system, so that we can make an educated and informed decision on what is the cost, if any, of routing more or less of our Living River water through the 2 Mile Pond.
Right. So, and I know, I think we're gonna soon get to a point where we are, this is, I think, the beginning of helping people understand the complexities and then understanding what it is the community wants to do once we have some answers and how we balance these different interests. And so that'll be an important component as well going forward.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, all right. I thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is fascinating Western water issue that we are dealing with, and lots of moving parts and different interests, and I don't know, fascinating. You could do some law review articles on this. You could this is the stuff that master's dissertations are made of. So anyway, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jesse, for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I think we're seeing a lot of interest regarding the 2 Mile Pond issue because it is a resource that is much broader than the neighborhood. We have folks from throughout the community of Santa Fe that visit this pond. As the stakeholders met in early July around this meeting, Representative Sapansky had mentioned that even her daughter was taking a field trip with her summer camp group to go visit that pond. So I think that's why we're seeing so much concern around this pond and what the future of the pond holds, because it is a valuable asset to the community, and the community really wants to preserve that asset if possible. So there were a couple things. On one of the slides, you had listed the stakeholder engagement, and just for public awareness, there were counselors that were part of that stakeholder engagement. Myself, as well as Councilor Romero Worth, have been part of this process. So I think the public needs to be aware of that. And so with that being said, from my knowledge, the last kind of stakeholder engagement meeting that was conducted, at least with myself and from what I understand, the Canyon Road Neighborhood Association, was that early July, I think it was July 6th meeting. So Director Roach, can you tell me what additional engagement has been conducted and with whom regarding the 2 Mile Pond, regarding the stakeholder engagement?
Subsequent to July 6th or this whole summer?
Yes. No, subsequent to July 6th.
I don't have the dates on the presentation. I do have those dates somewhere, and I'd be happy to share those with you. I don't know those off the top of my head. I think most of the engagement that has occurred since that July 6th meeting has been directly with Office of the State Engineer or with State Engineer and Senator Worth. And Representative Sapansky couldn't make that one, but we engaged with her directly later. So that has been the majority of that engagement since July 6th. Okay,
so just for the record, Canyon Road Neighborhood Association hasn't been involved in any engagement since that July 6th meeting that you're aware of.
They have certainly been involved in email communications with the city. There haven't been any formal meetings directly with the neighborhood association specifically on this topic that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Director Roach. I appreciate that clarification. So during that stakeholder engagement meeting on I believe it was July 6th, there were multiple options presented to us. One of the options was that the city can dedicate certain water rights to retain the water in that 2 Mile Pond to preserve it as kind of as an as is. Another option was to have water flow through 2 Mile Pond to somewhat preserve the pond, but still keep it more of a kind of an outdoor attractions. That way the community can visit the space. Not necessarily a meadow, I think, as you mentioned earlier, but more of a kind of a water attraction. And I'm using attraction in probably the wrong sense, but a nature attraction. And so we left that meeting on July 6th with the impression that there was going to be future stakeholder engagement meetings, meaning Office of State Engineer, the city, which included representatives from the mayor's office, the city attorney's office. As I mentioned, there was myself and Councilor Romero Worth. Representative Sapansky was present at that meeting, as well as some additional stakeholders from the Canyon Ridge Neighborhood Association. And we left with the impression that there was going to be future meetings regarding what were the next steps. And so I think folks were definitely caught off guard when there was actions taken after that meeting. And so I guess my question is, there was 2 actions that you noted on your timeline. One was the diversion structure was removed, and the other action was the cleaning of that pipe structure. Can you give me some more definitive dates and details in regards to the dates that the diversion structure was removed, and who requested, which staff members requested that action be taken? And then the second part to that is, what dates were the cleaning of the kind of pipe cleared, and who requested that those actions be taken?
Chair Rivera, Councilor Garcia, the removal of the diversion gate was done by the Nature Conservancy. That was not an action that the city took part in. And the cleaning of the standpipe was subsequent to that, and largely in response to concerns about stagnation now that there was no ability to directly move surface water through that complex. And so we were directed to go and take a look at what we could do, and we went exploring and found the standpipe and cleaned it out.
Okay.
And the date.
And who ultimately requested the standpipe be cleared out?
Well, I would say that we were in a meeting, and the question of the ability, our ability to reduce the level of the pond came up, and we went to look and see what we found. And we found it, and it seemed clearly a sort of a negligence of maintenance. And so we endeavored, I could probably take that on myself, or my supervisor, John Dupuy, I think is probably also willing to take that on. We were there, we found it together, and we endeavored to clean it out.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Is there any reason why communications wasn't there was re-engagement of the stakeholders prior to that decision being made? Because I know that you had a prior commitment, I believe, Director Roach, to attending the meeting that we held on July 6th. And is there why haven't we reconvened that stakeholder group?
Well, I believe there's intention to reconvene that group, but a lot of this has been information gathering to try to understand what our options are, and specifically what our legal options are. So the direction that there was no specific go clean out the standpipe direction given to us, because we didn't understand that was a possibility. But the direction that we received was that we're worried that there's a health issue. There's people complaining about potential mosquitoes and stagnation, and we need to figure out something to do. And so once we did find the actual standpipe, I think we took it on ourselves as a maintenance issue to clean it, solving that problem. In terms of additional meetings, I think as we get closer to understanding what our options are legally, that'll be the time for us to re-engage in a wider context to decide a path forward once we understand the parameters within which we can work.
Great. Thank you, Director Roach. And I just, I guess for the record, I definitely still want to be engaged in the process. So as future stakeholder meetings are convened, I would like to be invited to any future meetings that are held. So in regards to the options, as we're exploring the available options to us, as I mentioned during that meeting, we went over some options, and one of the options that actually was talked about was looking into the possible legal authority of grandfathering, and which, given that this pond predates the legislation that gave the Office of State Engineer any power to regulate the pond, that this could be a potential outcome, that there is a grandfathering in clause to this. Has the city investigated this grandfather clause?
Yeah, we have given our understanding of the statute to the Office of the State Engineer, and they are evaluating it internally. And I would say that we're still waiting on them for a definitive response related to that piece. So it's not quite certain yet what their response is in terms of whether this pond is grandfathered or not. And I think if there are no surface water diversions to the pond complex, then the argument that this is a grandfathered pond and we're in legal compliance is much stronger. I think that if we start to get into the desire to move surface water through the pond, then that option is on shakier footing because of how statute has changed since 1994.
Okay, thank you, Director Roach. But just so for clarification, we are exploring a potential grandfather clause, or are we not?
The sort of potential, yes. I think that it's one of the options we have is to not divert any water through 2 Mile Pond. And under that option, I believe the grandfather clause would be the legal framework that we would want to try and explore further.
Gotcha. Thank you, Director Roach.
And I didn't.
So I guess my next.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. But Assistant City Attorney Marcos Martinez is here as well, and he's happy to expand on that if you'd like.
Sure, happy to hear Assistant City Attorney Martinez's comments on it.
Thank you, members of the committee, Councilor Garcia. So the grandfather status that the state engineer is analyzing is whether just retaining the residual storage in 2 Mile Pond would require any kind of offsetting by the city of Santa Fe of its water rights. So just in fact, by way of that residual storage, does the city owe to the system any water? It is not an analysis as to whether that pond could store water again or actively store water, because it's already been ordered breached. It's been ordered not to store water and be breached. So I just want that to be clear for you.
Sure. Thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate it. Any other? Happy to take any additional comments, or else I've got 2 final questions for you, Director Roach.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. And so these questions are more so around next steps and planning and et cetera. As we move forward in determining what this plan looks like, as part of the planning, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is looking at kind of the scientific analysis of this area, and particularly looking at if there was to be some water flow through, not necessarily capture, but if we had a plan to have water flow through, is part of the evaluation, we're looking at capturing any data on any water that might potentially be lost to evaporation as it runs through the pond versus the water that might be lost through a bypass channel. Is it the exact same? And so is that part of the process?
Yes, Councilor Garcia, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the question we would really love to know is the choice between sending water around the pond or sending the water through the pond, the amount of time it takes for the water to go each way and the amount of losses associated with the water going each way. If we had perfect information on that, this would be a much easier conversation and decision. And so we are now looking at the best places to measure water and the best times to measure flows to get at that exact question.
Okay. Thank you, Director Roche. I appreciate you kind of confirming that we're looking at this. I mean, it's a big topic, big question, and I'm glad that we're looking at that data to help us make an informed decision as we move forward. The last question or part of this question is regards to the plan, and as we begin to do this analysis and ultimately look at any potential recommendations, do we have a time frame in regards to when we expect to have, for example, the analysis I mentioned earlier in the previous question, and then there's multiple conversations that I think we've established that conversations that need to be had with the appropriate stakeholders before we kind of present a proposal or a plan, next steps. Do we have a time frame in regards to that?
The short answer is no, because we need to understand the legal. So right now, there's no way. We do have a physical way to divert water through that pond, but we need to know that there's a legal mechanism by which we could do it, or it's a moot point. We have no choice. We have no policy options without that ability. And so once we understand better what our ability is there, then we'll understand the time frame associated with whatever that mechanism could be. So I guess the answer is we don't have a timeline, but we do need to think through, and we will be thinking through what sort of the interim approach is as we gather this additional information. So I'm hoping, I guess the one way I would try and answer that question is that I hope within the next couple of weeks, we have something, a fair understanding of what the legal framework will look like if we want to divert surface water through 2 Mile Pond.
Okay, thank you, Director Roche. And I guess given we don't necessarily have a timeline, and given that we're kind of in the season where seasons are changing, and I guess what I'm trying to get to is if we can have a decision made before next year, when the ecology of the area would be coming back with spring, et cetera, would be most beneficial, because once an environment like that dies off, it's really hard to bring back to its original state. And I think that is ultimately what the broader community is trying to preserve, is that ecological environment that has been such a pleasure and benefit to the community for quite some time. And so I do hope we can get some resolve to this matter in the coming months. I think it behooves us as a government to just move forward with the decision one way or another. And I do hope that we're really looking into all available options and making the best decision, and ultimately also including the public in that decision, making sure that we are hosting even similar to the community engagement opportunities you had earlier in the summer, similar presentations regarding the available options and potential plans to move forward, because I think there would be great interest from the public in regards to providing their public voice. I know that I had some outreach and engagement from many folks a couple weeks back after some of the announcements were made. There were folks that had reached out asking if they can participate tonight in the meeting. And so I think it is in our best interest to work collaboratively with all the stakeholders, which also includes the public, to ensure that everybody knows the best path forward for this space. With that, no other questions. Thank you, Director Roach. Thank you, Assistant City Attorney Martinez. I really appreciate the input. And again, just as we move forward with the stakeholder engagement meetings, I definitely would like to participate in those. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No other questions.
Thank you. Councilor Romero Worth, you had a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So just, there has been some email traffic over the weekend. Councilor Garcia, you were part of that. And I have been working today to get a community meeting for Tuesday, the 19th. I believe we are looking at the convention center as a possibility. Hope to have more details on that very soon, where I think the idea would be a presentation similar to what has been brought tonight. Dr. Roach, Director Roach would provide his presentation, and the community would have a chance to attend and hear this, and also then comment. I think we are a little bit in the hands of the state engineer because we don't really have particular options yet, because we don't know what we can do in the legal construct. And so I don't anticipate having, legal recommendations by Tuesday unless miracles happen, but who knows, maybe. And in which case, I think when the state engineer gets back, I think that will be the time absolutely to go back to the stakeholder groups and talk about the different options. But I think in the meantime, we can at least do a community meeting similar to this presentation here, and have an opportunity for the community to ask questions and give feedback and, talk about the different things that they want to see happen and the different values that need to be considered as we look for a solution that hopefully satisfies as many of the different stakeholder positions as possible. So I just would, I guess, let people know that we're trying to pull something together for Tuesday, the 19th, to do this same presentation. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jesse, when we vacated the 2 Mile Reservoir or the 2 Mile Pond, you said we transferred the rights up to McClure?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And was that all the rights, or were we required to keep minimal amounts of water in the pond, or?
So my understanding is that all of our storage rights were moved upstream at that time, and the de minimis amount of relic storage that was left behind did not require a right. You want to weigh in on that?
Thank you. The only thing I would add is that I think there might have been a presumption that if the water moves through a facility that retains water for 96 hours or less, then the state engineer is not going to require a permit for it. So it's important that the water flow through the 2 Mile Pond complex in 96 hours or less, 4 days or less, in order for the state engineer not to have to require us to do anything.
So because the valve was plugged up, with vegetation, the water wasn't allowed to move. So once had that been maintained, there would probably be no pond at all. Is that correct? Minimal amount of water?
Well, there's still a pond up there. It's about 2.5 feet lower, and therefore some amount of area smaller now than it was in June, let's say. But there's still a certain amount of water that is stored because the dam, although the dam was mostly removed, there's about I think it's less than 10 feet. You know, there's some amount of obstruction there that prevents water. The only way the water can get out is by falling through this standpipe. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. So when our reservoir levels get high and the spillway is actually activated, does that go into the 2 Mile Pond area, or is that diverted through the Santa Fe River?
So this year it went through the Santa Fe River, and I think this was an opportunity for us to send water, if there was a legal framework for us to send water through 2 Mile Pond. And that's what we would like to take advantage of, is if this coming year we're blessed again with good snowpack, we do have construction coming up on Nichols. And so there's going to be probably less ability to store water and more reservoir management. And so more opportunity for some of those surplus flows to be diverted through 2 Mile Pond. And so if we have the legal framework within which to do that, we do have the physical ability to do that.
All right. The water to the acequias, does that come from the 2 Mile Pond, or does that come through the bypass channel?
So there are 4 acequias that divert from the Santa Fe River from Nichols down to Patrick Smith Park, let's say. The first one is acequia Del Llano, and it diverts straight out of Nichols. And so that doesn't go through the bypass channel or 2 Mile Pond. The next one is Cerro Gordo, and it has to come out of the bypass channel. So in the current infrastructure, all diversions, all acequia really, flows to acequia Cerro Gordo will go through the bypass channel. And then the next 2 are below that. And so they could go around the bypass channel or through 2 Mile Pond. And at least until we have a firm answer on whether we can put water through 2 Mile Pond and legally, and it's not lost at an excessive, a measurable additional rate, we will continue to deliver to those acequias around 2 Mile Pond through the bypass channel.
Yeah, so basically our acequias they don't rely on 2 Mile Pond in order to get their legal amounts of water flow per year.
That's correct. And now that the diversion is not there, they should not be in any way impacted by the fact that 2 Mile Pond is there.
Yeah. And I think you answered this earlier, but the Santa Fe River, the releases we had earlier this summer don't come through 2 Mile Pond. They bypass 2 Mile Pond.
They went around 2 Mile Pond this summer. We tried to move a little bit through where we could, but we would like to be in the position to direct more of those through.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate that you're working through the OSC to try to figure out what can or can't be done with this. And I guess a lot of what we're talking about right now is going to depend on what decisions they make as far as what we should or shouldn't be doing with regards to the so-called pond moving forward. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you for everything you're doing. I think, I understand how the community is concerned about this, and knowing that you're concerned as well, I think is really important.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, Councilor Merriworth.
So, Director Roach, when you all cleaned out the standpipe, you poked some additional holes into that standpipe that have now clogged. Can you briefly address that?
Sure. Chair Rivera, Councilor Romero Worth. So, and I will respond to a question that was asked earlier by Councilor Garcia. It was July 17th when the cleaning occurred. And then subsequent to that, we were interested in understanding what the composition of the pipe below that was and what our options would be if we wanted to lower it further. And so a slot of about 16 inches was cut into what turned out to be a steel pipe, allowing the pond to drop below that. And then subsequently that was blocked, not perfectly sealed, but blocked with some metal and mesh. And the pond has now come back up above that. You can't see that slot anymore. And so the pond is within an inch or two of what I would say is the 1994 target level. And that's where we're hoping that with maybe one, annual maintenance, we'll be able to maintain it right around that level.
Yeah, and I guess I just add, it's very interesting. I had an opportunity to go up there and see that standpipe, and you can hear the groundwater now running through that pipe. Maybe you could hear, I didn't see it when it was clogged, but I found that fascinating because I think of groundwater as something you don't experience, right? It's underground, but it really a very interesting phenomenon for me anyway, was to just hear it's groundwater. That's what's running through there. And now that the pipe is cleared, it's actually moving, in a better way, which is helpful to the public health concerns that were expressed. So just wanted to ask that one follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Michael Garcia, I can't see you on the screen, but just want to follow up and see if you have anything else.
No other questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you for checking in.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Director Roach. Appreciate the presentation. Look forward to the public hearing. Really do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next presentation is the unmanned aircraft system. This came up at public safety, and Commander Sweeney gave a presentation. And I won't get too much into it. I don't want to spoil your presentation, but it's fascinating, and I thought it would be something great for the counselors that are on this committee to hear, and also for the public that may be more in tune to public works than they probably might be to public safety. So thank you for being here with us, and it's all yours. You might want to talk a little more directly into the mic. I think, I don't know if it's on. There should be a green light on.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys for having me here today to talk to you a little bit about this program. Get the presentation up here.
And this is a new program, correct?
Correct. It's kind of took birth 2017-ish, and then kind of throughout the time, nothing's happened from that time up to now. So about the last year, we've really been working on it. So, but over the past few years, the Santa Fe Police Department has recognized that drones have been being used by other law enforcement agencies throughout the country. Drones provide a safer alternative for officers who are being placed in dangerous situations and can reduce their risk or the risk to their lives and increase the overall effectiveness. Some of the common uses, make sure we're on the same one here. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Some of the common uses that drones are being used for by law enforcement consist of crime scene analysis, like homicide investigations, crash investigations, shooting incidents. There's tactical situations like barricaded subjects or SWAT situations the drones are being used in. Search and rescue is a big one. Missing persons, lost hikers, very common, I guess, here locally in Santa Fe. And then large events that draw large crowds, such as a Zobra, would be a big one for us. And then free speech demonstrations. Next slide, please. Some current statistics. As of 2023, there's approximately 1,400 law enforcement agencies around the nation that have some type of drone program that's being used. More notably, some of these agencies are like Los Angeles Police Department out in California. There's Phoenix Police Department in Arizona. And of course, local agencies here. New Mexico State Police has a program. Albuquerque PD, Las Cruces PD, Rio Rancho PD, Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. I think they have one that's been up and running for about 6 months now or somewhere around there. And then the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, I believe, is in the process of creating one themselves. And now we have our own program. Going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, in 2017, the Santa Fe Police Department had attempted to create a drone program. There was a few officers that initially started the creation of it. They purchased a few drones. Unfortunately, it just fell through. From 2017 until July of 2022, there was no talk or anything going on with drones, although we did have 2 sitting at our station. In July of 2022, there was a group of officers and detectives from various sections within the police department. They got together and created a committee in order to create our current drone program. Insight came from our patrol section, investigation section, special operations group, our support operations, and of course, our administration. The committee reviewed several different drone policies from various agencies. Some of these agencies were local, some of them were out of state. I listed off a couple agencies a minute ago. APD, Las Cruces, Rio Rancho. One of the ones that we got from out of state was a Hennepin County Sheriff's Office out in Minnesota. We did look at Phoenix PD, Los Angeles PD. During the process of research, the committee also reviewed several different drones themselves, which consisted of DJI, Brink, and Skydio. Ultimately, DJI was the one that was selected. We were able to purchase these through Axon, which is our current vendor for our body cams. And it made sense. They offered, I guess, the software that attaches into Axon itself, providing us access to view the drones live without actually having to have the remote. Lets our commanders look at it from other areas. You are on the correct slide. In April of 2023, a drone policy was drafted and created and was placed into effect, marking the first major milestone for our program. Currently, we have 7 team members, which includes myself. So 1 as the commander. We have 5 full-time members and 1 auxiliary member. This allows coverage for our patrol sections. We'll have 2 operators on day shift and 2 on swing shift. And then we have 1 other patrol officer that would be our auxiliary. And then myself and another team member are both detectives. This allows us to help out our criminal investigation section and then also our special operations group, which would consist of EOD or bomb team or SWAT or CNT for crisis negotiations. Go to the next one, please. All right, so our requirements to fly include obtaining a Part 107 certification through the FAA. Basically, this is a pilot's license. It's considered a remote pilot's license. In order for us to have a base knowledge for operating drones, because it's not normal law enforcement practice right now, we had to take advantage of a course, and we found a drone knowledge course to learn just a new skill set. And in order for us to pass the Part 107 exam, after getting through the Part 107 exam and getting certificates, or I should say remote pilot licenses, team members are required per our policy to either conduct 60 flights or have 20 flight hours. And this is mainly to demonstrate proficiency, let them get some hands-on experience before they can actually go out and deploy out in the streets with these aircrafts. In addition to that, they have to maintain or they have to attend monthly trainings, and they have to gather 30 minutes of flight time every month in order to stay proficient or demonstrate their proficiency. Okay, go to the next slide, please. We understand that the laws surrounding law enforcement's use of drones focus on citizens' privacy, but by balancing benefits of the drone technology and protecting individuals' rights. So our drones will not be, our drones will be deployed for exigent circumstances regarding public safety and officer safety, and search warrants will be required and will be obtained when needed, and they will not be used to spy on the public at large. I know that that's one of the main concerns that we have here with drones. Several case laws have been reviewed pertaining to aerial surveillance. I myself have had several conversations with the DA's office, with my administration, mainly Deputy Chief Champlin, who's kind of overseeing our program. And then also with the FAA themselves, we've had a visit from them come out and actually take a look at the program, and they were pretty pleased with what we got going on. And then the last slide. The use of drones is a great resource for law enforcement and for our city. By implementing this program, I think that it's going to make it just safer for law enforcement and for citizens at large. Thank you guys for giving me the time, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Commander Sweeney. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned a policy that was adopted. Tell me again when, and is it possible to get a copy of it, and who adopted it?
Absolutely. So it was not adopted. We created our own. So what we did is we looked at several different agencies that had drone programs that were already created. And we looked to just basically see what they're doing. Drone technology has been around for a little bit, but law enforcement's use of drones is fairly new. So instead of recreating the wheel, we looked at other agencies, took their policies, read through, saw what would work for our city and for us, and drafted our own policy. And I do have a copy here. I can get you that by the end of the night. Yes.
That'd be great. And when you say other agencies, I was going to ask you what other cities have drone programs. So it sort of goes to the same thing. When you say other agencies, you mean in the state, in other cities our size, what do you mean by other agencies? And then that sort of leads into, this may be an emerging thing that cities are starting to do. Can you speak to that too?
Sure. The agencies that we looked around was locally for one. We looked at APD, we looked at state police, Las Cruces. I had my list here on one of my screens, but we looked at for a handful around here. Then we also looked at Phoenix PD.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
We did look at Phoenix PD out in Arizona.
Okay, thank you.
We looked at Los Angeles Police Department in California. I can't think off the top of my head what other agency we looked at, but we did reach out to other states as well, just to see if they were doing something different than what was going on here within New Mexico. For the most part, everything was fairly consistent.
Okay, I'd be interested in seeing the policy that was developed.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I'll leave that there. In terms of the data that you collect, who owns it and what do you do with it? How long do you keep it?
So the data that's going to be collected is actually going to be stored in, it's through Axon. I believe it's called Drone Scene. It's a program that we have not purchased yet. It's something that we're looking at to purchase with our next, agreement with Axon. So that's in the very near future. But that will track the flight time, the dates, the location. It actually will give a visual model of where the drone was flying. And it will tell you where the gimbal or the camera was looking. There is an option to be able to put that out to the public, which me and the deputy chief have talked about doing that for transparency. And the data is stored within, I believe it's either within Axon or the program that is attached to Axon, but we would be the one storing that.
So we're not currently doing this. This is Coming Attractions.
We have the drones. We have purchased 5 drones. Our pilots are certified through the FAA. They have their license, and they are on the cusp of getting their hours and their flights in. So probably within the next few weeks, they'll be deployable. And then from there, once the data is starting to get, because they're deploying their drones, we don't have a way of collecting the data to put it for the public yet, but that is the goal. So what we're doing now is we actually have flight reports. So every time a pilot deploys with the drone, they have to write a report of what they did and the reason for the deployment. Now, actually tracking the flight, as I was saying about the transparency, we can put it up to show where the drone was exactly. We don't have that capability just yet, but that is something that we're going to be looking into.
So I'm confused. So you don't have the software yet that stores the video or the data?
Correct, for the most part. So what happens is the drone stores it on a USB card or an SD card within the drone itself. And if video is collected, we could pull that. And as of right now, we have to hand put it into Axon, which is our storage. So we just have to do it by hand if a video is collected.
And do you have any agreement with Axon as to who owns that video once it's loaded onto Axon's? Is it still in our control, or is it belong to Axon and they can sell it for various reasons?
I don't think they can. I can't answer that directly. I think Deputy Chief Champlin would probably be able
I
to
think that's an
that.
answer I'm going to need.
I can get that for you. I don't know that.
Yeah, and in terms of making it available to the public for transparency, what exactly are you making available? The video, or just the fact that the drone was in flight and where it flew and who flew it? What kinds of things are you?
Basically, it would be the flight path, if to answer that in a nutshell. But the video itself would have to go through, I believe, an IPRA request because it'd be considered evidence.
And again, you're deploying these in what I'll call limited circumstances, that I think your first slide alluded to or listed. Maybe could you go over those one more time?
Sure. So we plan on deploying them for exigent circumstances, I think is
I'm sorry.
exigent circumstances. I'm sorry, I'm
Exigent,
probably not
okay.
talking to this thing well enough here.
Yeah, it's the acoustics are bad if you not talking like basically right into the mic. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Basically, when our goal is initially to have patrol officers have these readily available for them in their car. If they get into a foot pursuit, or one officer gets into a foot pursuit, if a suspect jumps a backyard and is hiding in a backyard, we'd plan on throwing these up in the air so we can use them to get an aerial surveillance of what's going on, rather than sending an officer directly over the fence right away where he could get shot, stabbed. He's going over to over a wall into an unknown. The idea is to get the surveillance up, try to monitor what's going on. If we can make contact with a suspect ahead of time, we have an attachment on these drones where we can start giving commands right away, and we can actually order him out. It just creates some time and distance for an officer to be able to react differently, if that makes sense. And then also using it for search and rescue efforts, those types of things. We actually had a deployment with one, the last Silver Alert. I don't know if you had recalled that a few weeks ago, but we were able to canvass a large area using these drones that we wouldn't have been able to do as fast without them.
Yeah, thanks for that example, because when I think of search and rescue, I'm thinking about people lost in the foothills. I'm not thinking about elderly people or runaways or that kind of search and rescue. So that term is more broad for you.
Yes, but we can still use them out in the mountains as well. So,
Okay, yeah, this is something I'm interested in. So I'll be following up. Thank you.
thank you.
Councilor Michael Garcia, any questions?
No, Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero Worth answered the one question I had. Well, actually, maybe just a follow-up, because there was a couple examples given, foot pursuits or search and rescue. I think folks might have maybe some potential concerns around illegal search of property. And so maybe can you expand on that?
Sure. So we've talked with the DA's office. We've looked into a few case laws. There is no case law directly pertaining to drones, but there is case law out there regarding aerial surveillance. And basically, case law is the court's interpretation of particular laws. Basically, an incident happens, the courts make a judgment, and then that judgment based around that particular case becomes case law. So we've looked at a few aerial surveillance case laws pertinent to New Mexico. And with the DA's guidance, and of course, talking with the administration and what we can and can't do, and then following our policy as well, we feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to use these and protect citizens' rights at the same time. So it is on our radar that we understand that, Fourth Amendment privacy concerns for citizens is a big thing with these drones.
Okay. Thank you, officer. I really appreciate you. That sounds like you all are looking into this and doing your due diligence. I would also ask to be sent a copy of the policy as well, or maybe just if you can send it to the entire committee, just that way we have it, that'd be fantastic. But that,
Absolutely.
no other questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commander Sweeney. This is why I brought it up. You know, really, counselors would never know about this if, you know, it didn't come up through public safety and then, you know, to other committees through that process. So it wasn't something that I had heard about, but I think police has done a really good job from 2017 until now to look at different policies, to look at different deployment methods, to talk to the DA's office, to talk to other agencies, to put a policy together that I think is pretty sound, which will be sent to all of you. I think it's something that more of us need to hear about. So I'll talk to Councilwoman Cassett about getting it maybe on quality of life, so that we're all aware of really what's happening within our community. But I think you guys they're moving in the right direction, and you know, clearly the Public Safety Committee is in full support. And I think after this committee sees the policy, I think it'll feel a lot better for everybody. And clearly the way that they've used it recently with an alert silver and trying to find an elderly gentleman that was on one of the walking paths. They can cover a lot more ground with a drone than they can with on foot police officers, actually. So I think it has great potential, clearly a lot cheaper than buying a helicopter like some of the other communities do. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and look forward to this technology really helping our police force out. So thank you, Commander Sweeney. And unless there are any other questions. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We had nothing pulled from consent. We have no action items, no executive session, matters from staff.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I did have a few items from staff. West Alameda Culvert project is progressing really well. And today, the contractor gave us a schedule that is now 2 weeks earlier than we had originally expected, with the completion on Friday, October 6th. So it's looking really good. Guadalupe Street and Bridge reconstruction started today. As you could see, the road is closed and the bridge is getting torn up, which is really exciting. This project had been already in the work for 3 years when I got here over 5 years ago. So we're really happy to have brought that to construction. It's $11.6 million project. It's almost 100% funded by grants, 10 million from Federal Highway Safety Improvement program and about $1.5 million from the state. The Teen Center got their certificate of occupancy last week, and everything's on track for the grand openings that are scheduled soon. And you may have noticed that there's been a number of occasions on which the rail runner gates have interfered with traffic at Cerrillos and St. Francis intersection. Particularly noticeable was on Friday night of Indian Market weekend. It caused backups of miles in every direction. It's been happening for over a year. We've been working closely with the rail runner team, which is DOT and Mr. Cog and all these folks. It looks like they may have fixed it. It hasn't actually failed in 2 weeks, which is longer than it's ever worked, actually. So we're watching that closely. We're also working with them on another pending disaster, which is the Zia signal at the Zia train station there on St. Francis. So we are going to be, we've been asking them to make some improvements so that we could actually have a more sophisticated intersection. Right now, if the train is in the station, it keeps the gates closed. And that has occurred the train has had to sit in the station, and it's caused people to be blocked for 25 minutes at a time, and they can't get out of it. You were stuck in a traffic jam that was caused by the chair was stuck in a traffic jam that was caused by some signal timing configuration that wasn't optimized. But we're going to be working with DOT and with the rail runner to let us undertake a project to make that intersection more sophisticated. So because with the development of that new housing project that's going in there, the Zia station, what's it called? Anyway, the transit oriented design project that's going to put like 1,400 homes in there. We need to get that intersection fixed. So we're working on that. And let's see. The pavement rehabilitation purchase orders are being cut. And if you remember the fiscal year 24 appropriation for some pavement rehabilitation was provided. And so I can send you all the list, but it includes District 1 has Palace, Sandoval, Alarid, and Sabino. District 2 has Cordova from St. Francis to Don Gaspar. So that's going to be a nice piece. Old Pecos Trail from Cordova to Calle Medico. District 3, Paseo Real and Plaza Central. And then District 4, Yucca and Rodeo. So a lot of good pavement rehabilitation. Hopefully we'll get that done before the snow flies. And Mark says it doesn't matter that it's raining. So there's a little bit of updates on a few things going on in Public Works. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Director Wheeler. Appreciate that. Matters from the committee? See none. Matters from the chair. I have nothing except our next meeting, Tuesday, September 26, 2023. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For the presentations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good night.